This week on Government Matters.
And we literally have not done anything. So the purpose of this hearing is to basically pull our head out of the sand.
As Congress weighs a nuclear deal with Iran, lawmakers address the related threat of an electromagnetic pulse.
These fingerprints belong to people who hold national security positions. They've been vetted to have security clearances through the OPM process.
A new and frightening advancement in cyber theft. Hackers steal more than 1 million fingerprints in the OPM data breach.
I mean, I think this is a great deal for Lockheed Martin. It gets them into helicopters.
Lockheed will spend $9 billion on Sikorsky Aircraft and unload major components of its government IT business. A lesson in differentiation as Government Matters starts right now.
From ABC 7 and News Channel 8, this is Government Matters.
To our viewers around the world on the American Forces Network and here in the nation's capital, thanks for joining us. Government is the engine that runs this city. That's why Government Matters. Every week we'll bring you the top headlines in tech, security, and management. I'm your host, Morris Jones. Generally speaking, America's adversaries know they can't match up to the United States in direct military combat. But the U.S. has a critical weakness, an electrical grid vulnerable to EMP electromagnetic pulse. It was a topic on Capitol Hill this past week, and our Diane Cho was there.
In a world where many of us can barely survive a day without our cell phones or computers, what would happen if all of a sudden everything went dark?
The purpose of this hearing is to basically pull our head out of the sand. Stop and start paying attention to this very real threat.
The loss of power to critical infrastructure like hospitals and transportation could undermine the U.S. government, its military, and endanger the lives of millions of people, according to Joseph McClelland, the director of the Office of Energy Infrastructure Security.
There are satellites that are orbiting overhead that could potentially deliver a nuclear explosion that would cause something like this. So this is a threat that is real and that we need to acknowledge.
An electromagnetic pulse, or EMP attack, can be carried out by detonating a nuclear weapon at a high altitude by any terrorist or nation state that wants to inflict crippling damage on the U.S.
Depending upon the attack, significant parts of electric infrastructure could be, quote, out of service for periods measured in months to a year or more.
Another threat to the electrical grid occurs naturally. It's caused by space weather known as a geomagnetic disturbance. Experts say they occur at random once every century. There's a 10% probability one will happen in the next decade.
So, if we solve the problem that's sure to arise from space weather and geomagnetic storm, we will solve the long-distance transmission problem from high-altitude nuclear explosions, which may or may not arise.
Congress established an EMP commission back in 2001, releasing reports in 2004 and 2008. But many of their recommendations were not implemented.
And we've let perfect be the enemy of the good, and we've allowed governmental dysfunction to prevent us from even doing the basic first little quick fixes to begin protecting our critical infrastructure.
The EMP Commission estimated it would cost about $10 to $20 billion to protect all critical infrastructure from a nuclear EMP attack.
From the point of view of the cost of improvements in our infrastructures that are badly needed, that is not a great deal of money.
McClelland says more than a dozen nations, including South Korea and Germany, have GMD or EMP programs in place or in the early stages of addressing the problem. For Government Matters, I'm Diane Cho.
The Senate Committee on Homeland Security and Governmental Affairs also heard from Denise Roth this week. She's President Obama's nominee to lead the General Services Administration. The hearing covered a lot of ground, including federal property, category management, and strategic sourcing. But Senator Claire McCaskill says the effort to consolidate contract performance databases should be priority number one. That project is years behind schedule and way over budget.
Do you have any sort of timeline for the retirement of legacy systems and the full GSA oversight of contractor information database?
The system, as you know, as it's being built out, is in an iterative stage. And so we're building as we go and testing and ensuring that what we build onto it is actually being successful. Its completion date at this stage is, I believe it's 2018, but it will be dependent upon how successful each stage is.
The The committee could approve Roth's nomination this coming Wednesday. If that happens, she moves on to the full Senate. Denise Roth isn't the only name making news this week. Mark Foreman, the first federal CIO, has been tapped as the global head of Unisys Public Sector. Recently, Foreman served as VP of IT Services and Cloud Solutions at Ingility. EQIP, the federal system used to process background checks, is back online. Late last month, the Office of Personnel Management discovered a software vulnerability. OPM fixed the problem. They have no evidence it was ever exploited. In security matters, biometric data and the OPM breach. The National Journal now reports hackers made off with the personal information of more than 20 million people, including 1.1 million fingerprints. It marks a new and frightening advancement in cyber theft. Joining me with the latest is Jim Penrose, Executive Vice President of Cyber Intelligence for Darktrace. He's also former chief of the Operation Discovery Center at the National Security Agency. Jim, give us some background here. Who do these fingerprints belong to, and why is this aspect of the OPM breach so alarming?
This is critically important because these fingerprints belong to people who hold national security positions. They've been vetted to have security clearances through the OPM process. So obviously, any compromise of their personal information is a big risk to their personal security and, of course, the ability of the government to do those missions.
So these were the cream of the crop. These are the people that deserved all of these clearances. This was basically top secret information that the government had because they had to be cleared. Can biometric data be encrypted?
Well, biometric data, of course, can be encrypted, but you have to follow the right procedures to store that and to make sure it's protected. In this case, there was an actual masquerade operation that happened using credentials that authorized access to that material. So even with encryption, you have to be able to prevent the unauthorized access of that kind of information by an outsider who's masquerading their way into the network.
Now, I was speaking to a friend who works for the federal government about the stolen biometric data. That worker raised an interesting point. Personal identity verification, or PIV cards, contain digitized fingerprints. They give government employees and contractors access to federal information systems and federally controlled facilities. Theoretically, could those responsible for the OPM breach create fake PIV cards? Now, in other words, did this breach compromise the entire federal ID system?
Well, I can't really speculate on whether or not they could make a fake PIV card, but just think about our digital lives in general. Even our iPhones use fingerprints every day to authenticate us to various apps and to every aspect of our digital life. You can see how there's massive implications for the U.S. federal government and our employees, especially if their lives could be manipulated at the whim of a foreign power.
Now, the federal government can issue new Social Security numbers and offer credit monitoring services, but they can't issue new fingerprints. Can this be fixed?
Well, really what has to be done at this point is other mechanisms of authentication need to be applied. So you're going to have to use two-factor authentication and make the amount of time that any piece of data is valid and usable much less. So in combination with things like biometrics, you may be able to still use them effectively. But in the end, you're going to have to employ new technology and better kinds of threat detection systems to make sure that these compromises don't go unfound for months and even years.
We thought biometrics was the end-all be-all. It's what you know, what you have. Now we've got to go a step beyond that if they have some of our personal data like our fingerprints.
Absolutely. And we're going to have to find a way to bring a new technology to the fight. The attacker has a paradigm that they've been employing year after year and month after month, but we haven't made them change. So we have to find a way to use our own unique identities in terms of the enterprise, the networks that we run, to find a way to make a discovery about what's weird and unknown in that environment and network, and use that as the means to discover the intrusion.
Jim, before you go, I'd like to get your perspective on the motive behind this attack. If China is ultimately found responsible, what's their motive?
Well, I think their motive is clearly a national security motive. They're trying to do intelligence against the United States. And to get information about the people that make our government run and work every day and provide security for our nation is absolutely critical. So they're trying to figure out where the pressure points are, who could be manipulated, and how they can even change our national policy.
Information is power, and that doesn't have to happen overnight. The fact that anyone has this, they can use it now, they can use it a year from now, right?
That's right. This kind of information can be used when the time is right with a strategic goal in mind. And we really have to find a way to be able to detect that. Even in the private sector, we're going to have to get better at noticing what's different. Just like our bodies are able to figure out when we're sick, we have to see something that doesn't belong and focus our attention on it as soon as possible.
Good point. Jim Penrose, Executive Vice President of Cyber Intelligence for Darktrace. Thanks again, Jim.
Thank you very much.
We continue to trace the darker elements of the OPM breach straight ahead on Government Matters. How vulnerable is enterprise resource planning software to attack? An industry expert weighs in next. In Management Matters, the U.S. cyber posture post-OPM. After 2 data breaches at the Office of Personnel Management, Federal CIO Tony Scott announced a 30-day cybersecurity sprint. According to Reuters, Scott promised to share those results on July 20th. That deadline is passed, so what now? For answers, we turn to Mark Testoni, President and Chief Executive of SAP National Security Services. Mark, let's start there. Why would the White House delay release of their cybersecurity sprint results? Are they worried it will tip off hackers to more system vulnerabilities?
You know, I think the key issue in these things is they're probably trying to be thorough before they come out and release. There tends to be always an effort to jump on whatever is said as being a conclusion, and my suspicion is they're trying to be diligent in the process and take the time to make sure that they've got the answers.
Now, you think mindset is the biggest obstacle to cybersecurity in the public sector. Explain that for us.
You know, we have to look at the world a little differently. We've always looked at the world as putting perimeters and boundaries around our systems and networks, and that was typically sufficient enough. People are generally going to get in. I mean, there's an awful lot of threats out there, and there's a chance that they're going to get in. And if they do, we have to have defense in depth and be able to take action on anomalies or other things that are happening inside our network. So we need to start thinking about a position where we may have threats inside our networks versus assuming we can build enough walls and moats and high enough fences to stop people from getting in at all.
Now, Mark, let's talk about the role federal contractors like SAP play in the OPM breach. Last December, Strauss Friedberg, a digital forensics firm retained by USIS, said hackers infiltrated USIS through a vulnerability in SAP software. NextGov wrote an article on that report and included this quote: SAP, a major IT contractor with 50,000 customer organizations worldwide, would neither confirm nor deny allegations that assailants reached USIS through one of its systems. Now, Mark, SAP is a huge firm. You run one division. Do you know if hackers reached USIS due to a vulnerability in SAP software? Are you in a position to comment on that issue?
What I would say is that SAP takes security extraordinarily vigilantly, and in the role of the work we do in our division, even additive to that. And very frequently we are creating releases and making sure that we're addressing things that we discover that may be problems inside our software and the combined software when used with hardware and other things. So, I mean, this is an area that's difficult for all players in this environment, both users and developers of software capability and providers of the services. So we're all constantly vigilant in this area, and I think we have top processes, very well defined, very tightly managed, and we're doing the things that are necessary to make sure that these minimize the risk of these things happening.
Now, either way, ERP or enterprise resource planning software is vulnerable. SAP partners with a security provider called Onapsis. They've developed a solution called Onapsis X1 specifically to detect cyber risks and compliance violations affecting SAP platforms. A few weeks ago, their CTO wrote a commentary about those vulnerabilities. Here's an excerpt. Business-critical applications are rapidly becoming one of the most valuable targets for cyber criminals and cyber espionage. SAP and Oracle are releasing tons of patches every month, but are enterprises up to the task? So, Mark, is government doing enough to implement these patches, and are companies like SAP doing enough to supply government with secure software?
I think everyone is doing what they can in a very, in a different environment. We got to step back and take a look at the last 25 years. We've developed and taken the internet commercially in the last 25 years that has created unbelievable economic prosperity, information, and just has changed our world. And by and large, the infrastructure, the software companies, the customers, both government and commercial, and all the players in the network have done great work, incredible work in protecting. These threats are evolving very fast. We're all working to address those threats. And I think what we're going to need to see is even more collaboration between government and the private sector, more non-traditional collaboration. And you saw this when Secretary Carter went out to Silicon Valley not 6 weeks ago, to really address and get ahead of these threats. We have the smartest people in the world working in the companies that support the cyber world. We have to leverage them not only in government but commercially, and we have to collaborate in a better way, and I think you're seeing the aspects of that.
I appreciate your candor. Mark Testoni, President and Chief Executive of SAP National Security Services. Thanks, Mark. Year after year, Lockheed Martin is recognized as the nation's top contractor. There's a reason for that. The Sikorsky deal and a lesson in differentiation. Straight ahead on Government Matters. In Tech Matters, Lockheed Martin and a lesson in differentiation. The nation's top contractor has just announced it will acquire Black Hawk helicopter maker Sikorsky Aircraft for $9 billion. The company and industry analysts call the acquisition a natural fit. But there's another, possibly bigger story here, and it could serve as a cautionary tale for the entire IT industry. For more, I'm joined by Nick Wakeman, Editor-in-Chief of Washington Technology. Nick, let's start with this Sikorsky deal. Give us the basics.
Yeah, I mean, I think this is a great deal for Lockheed Martin. It gets them into helicopters, which is a new area for them. It gets them access to international markets. That's been a big goal for them, for the company, for the past few years. And it also makes a statement that they're going to be a platform company, that they want to do, be in an area where they can bring, innovation and expertise. And it's also more than just building helicopters. There's a lot of, logistics work that comes from this, command and control, spare parts, support services. There's a very long tail of opportunities that is going to come with this Sikorsky business, and it'll give them more visibility into the markets that they're in. They'll know sort of years out what the spend is going to be, and it's really hard for the government to turn off and turn on these kinds of platforms like they can with IT. The world is changing. I can't see why that'd be a reason for fewer helicopters. Of course, we're going to need that. That's a done deal for them, and it's a good one. Lockheed also announced plans to divest 5 major components of its government IT and technical services businesses. Here they are: air traffic management, technical services, government enterprise IT, commercial cyber, and government healthcare IT. They add up to about $6 billion in annual revenue with profit margins of more than 7%. Nick, why would Lockheed unload components that make a ton of money? Well, there's a couple answers to that. I mean, it is a huge piece of business for them. They've been the top IT provider in the federal market for 21 years. But the last few years, they've really been under a lot of pressure. They've seen, their margins have come down, revenue has come down. In 2010, they were about $9.9 billion in their IT revenue. Now in 2014, it was down to $7.8 billion. Now they've done some divestitures, but they've been under a lot of pressure, and it's been increasingly competitive in that marketplace, and they've really struggled on how to deal with that. Now, yet at the same time, Lockheed's not dumping IT entirely. Tell us more about that. Yeah, they're keeping their commercial cyber business, which is protecting networks, ferreting out hackers, being proactive and reactive to those kinds of things. There's also some offensive cyber work in there. They're keeping their energy work, which they see as a big growth opportunity. And they're also keeping what they call mission IT, which is kind of the IT that's sort of at what they call the pointy end of the spear, which would be things like intelligence work, real-time analytics, things that really are very focused on specific missions of the warfighter. So they're keeping all that, and I think that'll probably be about $3 billion in IT revenue for them. Before you go, I'd like to talk about the role price plays in this discussion. You write, here's the hard, sad lesson. For most of the IT market, government customers don't see any differentiator other than price. Too many contractors are interchangeable.
All right, Nick, so is the federal government's push toward LPTA, lowest price, technically acceptable, the driving force behind Lockheed's new business model?
You know, I think it's a big part of it. I mean, we've seen LPTA have a tremendous impact over the last 4 or 5 years, and it's really changed, I think, the mindset of the customer. They're much more focused on cost and price, and when you have contractors that are bidding solutions and technologies that, from the customer's perspective, look the same, it really does come down to price. And even now where we're seeing more best value contracts, you know, the scores come in on the technical side, and the companies are getting the same scores, it becomes a price shootout. And I think that for Lockheed was really a big challenge, because Lockheed does have a pretty, you know, their cost structure with all their other parts of their business is on the high side. And the IT business, you really need a much lower cost structure than Lockheed was able to put in place there.
Well, I know they're watching the show, and now that they own Sikorsky, I'd like to go for a helicopter ride. We'll see what happens with that.
Well, that'd be fun, wouldn't it?
Nick Wakeman, Editor-in-Chief of Washington Technology. Thanks again, Nick.
Thank you.
We'll turn from security to final matters straight ahead. For NASA, the hits just keep on coming. First, they show us Pluto as we've never seen it before. Now, word of a new planet that scientists hope could support life. David Wright has more.
In the world of astronomy, this is a holy grail, the nearest thing yet to another Earth. Kepler 452b, circling a sun slightly brighter than our own. The second big news in a week from NASA. Last week, Mission Control burst into cheers as NASA's New Horizons gave us our first close-up view of Pluto, including an animated flyover of Pluto's icy mountains and plains. Today, this new Earth from the Kepler Space Telescope, launched 6 years ago. Kepler's mission? To find what astronomers sometimes call Goldilocks planets, where conditions might be just right to sustain life. Kepler 452b is bigger than Earth. It could have water and atmosphere, we just don't know. And it's 1,400 light years away, but possibly, someday, a new home. David Wright, ABC News, New York.
And that's the latest from Washington. Thanks for watching. I'm Morris Jones. We know your week is filled with other matters. Save this half hour for us.